So hello, everyone. My name is Sarah McGuire. I'm the community leader here at Osmind. We host community events bi-weekly on our practice community, which are typically exclusive for Osmind customers. However, we have chosen to make this event public because I think that this is absolutely an incredible topic to be exploring together, for wider audiences. And yeah, we're happy for everyone to be here. Thank you for joining and taking the time to be with us today. We're excited to learn the basics of how to market your mental health practice. Patients need a way to find you, and marketing your practice is merely a strategy to gain and retain the most aligned patients. In a recent Osmind customer survey that we conducted, we found that this was an area that many private practices needed the most support in. So we want to start the conversation, and I bet this won't be the last time we talk about this as a group. So we're happy to be hosting this event and be joined by expert Michael Fulwiler, founder of Fulwiler Media and brand marketing. Here we go. We have our introductions here. Founder of Fulwiler Media, brand marketing lead here at Herd, as well as Dr. Carlene MacMillan, VP of Clinical Affairs at Osmind. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Dr. Carlene to share a little bit more about Osmind, the host of today's event.
Sure. Yeah, so welcome everybody. So for folks that aren't familiar with Osmind, Osmind is the premier technology platform for breakthrough mental health treatments. So what does that really mean? It means we are an electronic health record and practice management platform, full service electronic health platform, from e-prescribing to measurement-based care, kind of all the bells and whistles, payments, all those good things. And we also have a practice community. So we're really trying to promote connection and learning amongst those folks that are using our EHR. And we're also really interested in supporting the Osmind community beyond just writing notes, which is very important, but we know there's a lot to your practice. And so we're looking to support all of you. For folks that are curious, you can go ahead to osmind.org and you can book a demo with one of our lovely account executives, and happy to have you check it out. And today I'm super excited to have Michael Fulwiler here. I think when I think of mental health marketing, I think of Michael, which is a testament to his skills. He's done such a great job, started out at the Gottman Institute and really grew their presence to be sort of a household name, at least amongst mental health professionals. Has a great weekly newsletter, which I'm sure he'll tell us about, and has an amazing Twitter feed. If you don't follow it, just stop what you're doing and follow it right away. Not only is it a wealth of knowledge regarding marketing, but Michael really has his finger on the pulse, I think, of the mental health field as a whole. And we've seen that it's gone through so many changes over the past several years, and a lot to talk and think about. So I think before we pass it over to Michael, I'm just going to throw up a quick poll. So if you want to go ahead and answer this will really help us just kind of frame the discussion today. And without further ado, Michael, all yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Carlene. Thank you to Osmind for inviting me. Just super honored to be here. And thank you to everyone who is here and taking time out of their Friday to hang out with us on Zoom. I hope that you're able to learn at least one new thing today about marketing. We're going to run through the basics of marketing here in about 45 minutes. So, we'll keep things high level, but also going to share some tactics and some frameworks that hopefully are practical for you, that you can come away from this session and apply it in your practice. So we're going to start by talking about what marketing is and what marketing isn't. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there that lead to a feeling of marketing that isn't one that's positive. A lot of therapists that I talk to, that just marketing doesn't feel good. So we'll talk about why that is. And then when I think about marketing kind of at the most basic level, I really think about marketing kind of in three stages. The first being really understanding who you're marketing to. And so that's identifying your target audience, as a mental health professional. This is your ideal client, if you don't really understand who you're trying to reach, it's really a non-starter, because everything else really needs to, align with who you're trying to reach with your marketing. We'll talk about your messaging and positioning. So how you're talking to that ideal client, talking to that patient, and then where you're marketing to them. And that really gets into probably what you think about when it comes to marketing, like what channels are you using? Are you on social media or not? A lot of folks just jump to, great, how are we going to market? But they don't have that foundation. And that's why a lot of marketing will fall flat or miss. And so really excited to dive into that. And please, would love for this to be an interactive session. Definitely drop questions in the chat and I'll stop throughout. And Dr. Carlene, please feel free to jump in as well. So with that, great. Oh.
And then before you get started, just the results of the poll here as results trickled in. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to take a look at this, but biggest one here in terms of what's your biggest challenge is which marketing channels and tactics to focus on. So I know you'll be getting into that, and just people, as you said, not knowing where to start. And then in terms of where people would like to invest further, a lot of interest in advertising, but then pretty much across the board, improving website, email marketing, social media, a little bit less interest in reputation management. So yeah. All right. Thanks for participating in the poll.
Thank you. Great. So, marketing like therapy is hard to define. I think you talk to a different marketer, they're going to give you a different definition. I really love this definition from Seth Godin, who, if you're unfamiliar with Seth, he's kind of an OG in the field. He's written a bunch of books. He has a daily newsletter that he sends. It's really like short and actionable. And he's really a marketing inspiration of mine. And he defines marketing as the generous act of helping someone to solve a problem. And so if we think about marketing, it comes from the word market, right? And within a market, there's buyers and there's sellers. And buyers, so in this case, a client or a patient is having a problem, right? They're feeling anxious, maybe they're feeling depressed, maybe they're feeling lonely, they're struggling with something related to their mental health, and they're looking for a solution. And as a service provider, you're able to provide them with that solution to help solve the problem that they're having and deliver a outcome or result, right? And so if they don't know that you exist, they can't find you, and ultimately you can't help them, right? And so I think where marketing kind of goes wrong is when it's bad marketing, when it's unethical marketing. And so what does that mean? I think, when we talk about good marketing and ethical marketing, it's really about, delivering on the promise that you make. We're not like overstating what we do. We're not pressuring people to buy or make a decision. There's a lot of tactics that we see in the mental health space with some companies, that I won't name, but their marketing tactics kind of toe that line of being, unethical. And that's where you really get that sense of like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I think we've all seen an ad or we've been targeted by marketing that just doesn't feel good. And I think that creates a sense of like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to talk about myself. But hopefully this framing of marketing is really, it's helping people to solve a problem, helps you to like think about it in a different way and one that's positive. And so if we go to the next slide, this is one that I like to show, because I think there's also some confusion about the difference between marketing and advertising, marketing and public relations, PR, marketing and branding, right? And so when we think about marketing, right, it's telling people what you do and like how you can help them. So in this example, this gentleman is saying, I'm a great lover. Advertising is really more about projection, right? And so he's just repeating himself. When you think about advertising, you think about, like an ad on the radio or an ad on TV, something that's really more projection. Public relations is, someone that's talking about you, maybe they're recommending you. So if we think about PR, that's, if you were to be, written up in, a blog post, or maybe someone was on the radio or on a podcast talking about you. That's more PR, public relations. And then branding is how your kind of target audience, how they perceive you. So it's their perception of you. And really marketing drives all of these things. I see marketing as sort of like the umbrella to these things, but hopefully that helps to kind of clarify what the differences are here. And it's probably a separate presentation. But really what we're talking about here is marketing. So it's really how you talk about what you do in your work. I want to stop here before we move into identifying your audience and see if there's any questions before we move on. Nope. Okay. Hopefully that means everything is super clear. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Great. So as I mentioned, when we talk about marketing, I think a lot of people really aren't sure where to start, right? Like it feels really overwhelming. I think we just saw that in the poll here. And so if I was going to advise you on where to start with your marketing, I would start on who you are marketing to. You've probably heard this saying, if you try to be for everyone, you're not really for anyone. And so there's a lot of like concern, I think, when I talk to therapists about, who their ideal client is, how do they focus their practice, focus their marketing, because they don't want to become too narrow. They don't want to like leave anyone out. And what ends up happening is when you try to market to an audience that's too broad, you end up attracting patients or clients who are not aligned, or you don't get clients at all, because typically clients are looking for someone who really like understands, going back to that problem that they have, and they need to feel confident that you can help to solve the problem that they're having. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but actually the more that you narrow your audience, the bigger your audience gets, because there's more folks who really feel like you can help them. One sort of model of thinking about this is if we look at this Venn diagram here. So when we think about like, who is my ideal client for my practice, kind of think about it in 3 areas. So one being your like unique clinical expertise. So, what do you have training in? What is your background? Your personal interest. So like, who do you want to work with? Like, who energizes you? And then is there ultimately demand from that audience? Because if there's not demand, like, if you open up an in-person practice and your ideal client is a college student, but you live 200 miles away from any college campus, right? There's just not going to be demand in that market. And so you're going to struggle to get clients. And so, ideally, I think the target client bullseye here is somewhere in the middle. Another kind of helpful framing here, we're thinking about, who is my target audience, is to think about who is not in your target audience, who don't you treat? And that's okay, right? Like we can't treat everyone. And so I think eliminating who we can't treat helps to clarify who we can treat. Another thing I'll say here is that I posted about this on Twitter this week, and it's kind of been a hot topic of discussion, is that when you have an ideal client or niche, that doesn't mean that you you need to see them and no one else exclusively, need to see them, right? Like you can have a niche or specialization in your practice, but you can also work with other clients that don't necessarily fit that niche. The really like the value here, and what I want to drive home, is that if you don't have a clear idea of who your audience is, it just becomes a lot more difficult to market, right? The way that I think about this is like, it's a lot easier to have a conversation with one person, with an individual, than it is to present to an entire room of people and try to relate to everyone like on a personal level, right? And so it's actually an exercise that I recommend when you sit down to write your website copy or your directory profile. Really think about like one person that you're speaking to, And that'll help your voice to come across in a more kind of authentic way.
Michael, can I ask you a question about expertise? Because I know we
Sure.
have many folks that are just starting out and they may not feel comfortable saying that they have expertise. How do you kind of think about that? And is it enough to just have some interest and then kind of learn along the way?
Yeah, I think what's important here is this is iterative, right? Like you don't need to identify your ideal client or your target audience like right in the beginning and then stick to it through through your entire career. I actually believe like in the beginning you should probably work with different types of clients and see, you know, like what feels like a good fit and what doesn't. And then I think expertise is something that you know just collect throughout your career, right? Like as you kind of become more and more seasoned as a practitioner, you may take, you know, advanced training. You know, maybe you decide that you're going to specialize in, you know, EMDR, for example, or, you know, a specific type of treatment. And you kind of go down that path. But yeah, you don't have to have that figured out, you know, right away. Can go to the next slide. Great. So we have a basic understanding, or at least you're thinking about, great, like who am I trying to reach with my marketing? Now, sort of the next step is to really nail your messaging and positioning. This is how you're speaking to them. And kind of the hard truth here is that clients, you know, potential clients and patients don't typically care about you. They care about, you know, whether you can help them. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see therapists and clinics, psychiatrists make is in their marketing, they talk about themselves. And it's totally like understandable why they do this. Right? Like they're trying to build trust with that potential client. They're trying to build credibility, but often like that doesn't resonate, right? So think about if you are looking for a therapist and you go to their website, they're just talking about themselves. You don't really feel like you're connecting with them. They're not speaking to you. And so my kind of advice here is to be client focused, right? Like if you think about if you're at like a social event or a networking event and you're just walking around like talking about yourself, that's probably not going to engage in good conversation, right? And so thinking about like being more focused, client focused in your messaging. Kind of a framework here that you can steal from me is in your kind of headline on your website, or if you think about your marketing, using the kind of the sentence, we help, and the blank there is who you help. So that's your target audience. What do you help them do? And how do you help them, right? And so if you can include all three of these in one statement, that's a really strong messaging and positioning statement. So this is the website for my, you know, consultancy, and like right on the website it says we help mental health companies grow through content marketing, right? So if you're a mental health company and you're looking for content marketing and you want to grow, like great, right? It seems like I can probably help you do that. But if it was more broad about, you know, like I do marketing, it may not connect on that level. And so this is where having that like specialization, right, and an understanding of who you're trying to reach is really helpful. I think we could move on. Is there any questions here? Yeah, James, don't try to be everyone's lover. Yeah, that's right.
Maybe it's a little of a side, but I just can't help but notice the join the wait list button. How should folks think about that? They're getting full? Like, do people actually click and join the wait list, or are they kind of deterred by that? And do you want them to be deterred? Like, how do we think about that? Like, are you generating FOMO with that, or is it genuinely because you have a big wait list?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I'll give you a little secret. So for my consultancy practice, the only option to work with me is to join a wait list. And so part of that is the perception of like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
like he is busy, he is booked. And at the same time, like I also am. But if like, I have availability, then I go to the wait list. And so there is a sense there of like, yes, the perceived scarcity, of me and my time, but also that like credibility. So that's like a little bit of a kind of, call it like a hack, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I would say it really depends on the client, right? Like if a client is, a therapy client is looking for help right now and you are full and have a wait list, like they may just move on to the next, to the next provider. But if you have a wait list, you're probably doing a pretty good job marketing. And so like, you don't want to take on more clients than you can handle, right? So I would say absolutely, like if you are full, building a wait list, and then, if someone drops out of treatment, or you graduate someone from treatment, then you can go to that wait list. And it's a nice way to kind of create a sort of backlog for yourself of, potential clients.
Thanks.
Great. So we've talked about who you're marketing to, how you're talking to them. Now we can get into where you're marketing to them. And I've identified 3 tactics. And so the first one, if you want to, so content marketing is a specialization of mine. And I really believe in the value of content marketing. And the reason that I believe in the value of it is because it's so accessible, right? Like it doesn't cost anything other than your time to create content, right? Like you can write an article or a blog post for your website. You can post on social media. Like the barrier to entry for content marketing is very low. And so what do I mean when I say content marketing? So the way that I describe content marketing is that it's a value exchange. And so as the business, as the, mental health practice, we're providing value to potential clients through content, and that's for free. So that's like educational content, whether that's, how-to articles or posts on social media or videos. And so we're providing all this value to folks, which builds relationships, it builds trust. And then the more value that you provide to them, the more likely that they are to provide value to you in return by hiring you for your services, right? And so it's really about like giving stuff away for free. For me, what does that look like? That looks like a newsletter that I write every week, and so I'm delivering value to people without asking for anything in return. But when they're looking for marketing help, I'm top of mind for them. I've already delivered value, so they feel confident if they were to hire me, I can deliver even more value for them. Just a non-exhaustive list here of content marketing channels. When I think about, content, there's like types of content, right? I think the most sort of popular form of content is written content. So that's articles, blog posts. If you have a specialized practice, I think being able to rank on Google for that specialization when people search for you, especially if it's geographic, is super, super, super valuable. And so really kind of like leaning into that. There's also, think about like graphic content. So those are images and visuals that you can provide through social media. There's video content now, through Instagram and through TikTok and through YouTube. Audio content, it's podcasts. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can create value. And again, it really is dependent on who you're trying to reach, right? And so who you're targeting will influence which channels that you use. And so I talk to therapists who they like feel overwhelmed. They're like, I see a list of 20 marketing channels here. Like, what should I do? We talk about, okay, well, who are you trying to reach? well, I work with college students. Okay, like, so, like a younger millennial Gen Z audience, like probably more likely to be on, say, like a TikTok or Instagram than Facebook, right? And so you're able to kind of narrow down where you should be. And the goal there is to like meet people where they are. It's tough to expect people to like find us, right? And so the more that we can like go to them and reach them where they are, the better. Any questions here? I think especially, we talk about breakthrough mental health treatments. If you're a clinic or a psychiatrist that's offering breakthrough mental health treatment, a lot of people probably don't know what that means, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here to create content around like educating people, like what is a breakthrough mental health treatment? What does it treat? Like, how does it work? I think there's a lot of opportunity there to create content that is really educational in nature, right? Because we think about content as being, like educational or informative. It doesn't always have to be. Like sometimes it can just be entertaining. Like when I think about content I'm putting out through Twitter, it's not always educational. Like sometimes it's just more for entertainment value, and like that's still providing some value, right?
Mm-hmm. Michael, we have a question in the chat about social media in particular, and is social media really helpful if you don't have thousands of followers? I'm curious, I checked today, you have like almost 18,000 followers.
Yeah.
I remember back when you had like 10 and you were having a contest with someone else, a therapist on Twitter, right? So you start somewhere, but how would you kind of advise folks regarding, getting on Twitter and growing?
Yeah. I think it can be. What I'll say here is like, you don't have to be on social media. I think anyone that tells you that you have to do anything when it comes to marketing is probably lying to you. I think the way that I like to think about it is that, marketing is most impactful when it's authentic, right? And so if you like being on social media, like if you enjoy being on Twitter, you enjoy making YouTube videos, or you enjoy having conversations and like doing a podcast, that's great. But if you don't enjoy it, like if it doesn't give you energy, then I wouldn't do it. Like you could outsource it. But I would say like really lean into what you enjoy doing. And in terms of like building a huge audience, like, no, I don't think so, right? Because if you look at your practice and how many clients you need, it's probably what in a solo practice, depending on, the type of services that you're offering, if you're a therapist in private practice, right? Like 25, 30 clients, like that's all you need. You don't need 1,000 customers for your practice. And so I think like, if you can tap into a, niche, or if you can kind of become known as the person who does what you do, that's a really powerful thing, right? Like the fact that you said that, like when you think of mental health marketing, you think of me, like that's intentional, right? That's like something that was strategic for me of like, okay, like I'm going to try and like build kind of a brand around this. So when people think about like, oh, mental health marketing, they think about me. So that's like very validating to hear. And I think, there's opportunity for, people to become known as like that person that does what they do. I think another way to think about social media is and we'll talk about this in a minute, but as a way to network with other professionals. I know a lot of mental health professionals who are active on social media, and they're not necessarily like reaching clients, but they're reaching other therapists and psychiatrists. And so they're building a referral network. And so that's also a really valuable marketing channel. So social media is not just, what we would consider like B2C, business to consumer, but it's also with other businesses. Right.
And I think we have some other questions, but I think we'll probably get to them more towards the end and kind of weave them in if they're, yeah.
Great. Happy to, we're going to save time for questions at the end. So this is just a visual here. Again, when you think about content marketing, it's really a value exchange, right? So like you're providing value, and then you're getting value in return. But if you're not providing value, then it's kind of, you're not really marketing, you're advertising, right? So if we go back to that, or we don't have to go back to it, but think about that visual in the beginning, right? Like if you're just projecting, you're not really providing value, and you're just asking people for cash value, but they're like probably not going to give it to you. But if you provide people with value, then they're more likely to provide you with cash value and hire you. So here are just some screenshots from my Twitter and newsletter, just to give you an example of like, what does content look like, right? And so like, for me, when I think about creating content on social media, it's really about like just being aware of trends and memes and like what people are talking about and like what's kind of the latest meme format, and then trying to just like jump on that with a therapist spin. So, and that for me, like, is possible because I'm tapped into it. And I think that can be a challenge, right? Like, especially with a format like Twitter, which just like moves so fast that if you're not like on it every day, you kind of like miss what happens. So I definitely understand that. And I'm not encouraging you to like live on social media every day. But if you're wondering like, how does like Michael stay on top of all these trends? It's just because like I have Twitter open on my computer. So this is just like a meme format about how therapists are terrified of progress notes. There's a like video. So this was like a viral video that, I shared sort of within the context for therapists. And then this is an example of my newsletter. And this is an interesting example here because I was actually referencing content that someone else created in my own newsletter, right? And so going back to like, if you're delivering really valuable content, you're potentially reaching clients, you're potentially reaching, other therapists and referral sources, but you're like also reaching other people who are also reaching potential clients, right? And so we talk about like shareability potential, and like, I just try to keep this simple. It's like, if I put out something that's valuable and helpful, it's like more likely to be shared and seen. So I don't necessarily like spend a lot of time, like digging into keyword research and things like that. Like, I think marketing can feel like overwhelming when it comes to the data and analytics side of things. And my belief is really that like, if you're delivering value, like it's going to resonate as long as you have a clear understanding of who you're trying to talk to. Great. So I would say like for someone, Dr. Carlene, you mentioned in the beginning, like if you're just starting out, maybe you don't have necessarily that like expertise, or maybe if you're just starting out on social media, you don't have a large audience. I think referrals and word of mouth, like I'm convinced, is the best marketing strategy in the beginning, but also like as your practice grows. I think, folks who are in private practice for a long time, like don't generally need to market themselves because they're just full and they're like generally known for what they do. But I think in the beginning, if you're trying to get referrals, again, like it's really important that you have a clear understanding of who you're trying to reach and who your audience is, right? Because if I am going to make a referral to Dr. Carlene, but like I don't know who she sees, like I wouldn't know who to send to her, right? But if she has a very clear target, audience or ideal client that she serves in her practice, I would say like, okay, great. When someone who comes across my desk or calls me or, sends me an email, great. She's the first person that I think of. And so I think, networking here, building relationships with other providers becomes super important. This is also with physicians, right? Like other referral sources, not just other therapists. And then kind of what I've seen is that people are more likely to refer you if you refer them. And so I think like actively making referrals as well is a good way to get referrals.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in here really quickly here, Michael, on our practice community for Osmind customers, we have, this kind of exclusive community where we offer this space for clinicians to send and give referrals. And I think making that avenue easier is just, it's going to keep happening with, everything being more virtual and online, but we're just really excited to host, or at least host a space for something like this.
Yeah. Just a question from Christy here about like humor and content. Absolutely. Right. Like there's certainly nuance here. When we go back to like ethical marketing and good marketing, right? Like we're not talking about clients, we're not disclosing any information. And I think also like the way that we talk about mental health is super important. With that said, like I do see a lot of therapists, especially on Instagram, are like posting like memes and jokes and like leading with humor about mental health. I think it's just like the nuances, like we're not like making fun of people who are struggling, right? But like there's a lot of jokes around kind of general topics like people, having anxiety and things like that. And I think if you ask me, like my take on that is like, I think humor is a way to make mental health more accessible and less stigmatized. And it's a way for like people to talk about it. And it like in not such like a serious clinical way.
Yeah, and I have a thought on that too, which is like I'm not a TikTok person, right? That's just not my medium, right? But there are a lot of people on TikTok, a lot of patients that are generating mental health content, some of which is really helpful and others which is like blatantly misleading and potentially harmful. And so I think that if you are someone who's maybe a little bit more theatrical and creative in this way, to get on TikTok so that our voices as professionals are on there. And in order to do that, you kind of you can't read the DSM, right? You got to do something kind of clever. You got to do something that's going to catch the audience, because otherwise our voices are going to be drowned out by kind of trash, BuzzFeed level quizzes on ADHD.
Yeah, I interviewed Jeff Gunther, who's the founder of Therapy Den. He's Therapy Jeff on TikTok and has like millions of followers. I'm not sure where he's at today, but kind of his perspective on that is that as mental health professionals, it's important that we show up in these spaces, right? Because we're providing,
Absolutely.
or not to say me, because I'm not one, but you're providing content that is valid, right? And versus like all the content out there, there's just like a lot of noise and content that is not accurate and harmful. And so I think there's somewhat of like a responsibility to be in those spaces and like talk about what's true. I think that the nuance there is like, as we, if we show up on social media and we're providing content that it's really like educational, it's psychoeducation. We're not providing therapy. We're not giving advice. We're not diagnosing people through social media, but like, it's okay to, educate and share information. And if the way that you do that is in like a funny way, that's one way to reach people. Great. Can move on to the next one. So the kind of third strategy, I don't know if I'd call this a strategy, maybe like marketing tactic, lever you can pull is paid marketing. And I would say like, if you're a therapist in private practice and you don't have a large budget, it's really tough to compete kind of now more than ever in paid marketing channels. And, what do I mean by paid channels? That's like Google AdWords, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, like social media, because, the way that those work is if you run an ad, you're competing on certain searches and keywords, with everyone else who's trying to rank in the search results for those terms, right? Or you're trying to target a specific kind of audience, and you're competing with the mental health startups and these big companies that have $1 million ad budgets. And so I've seen, therapists just like waste money on ads. I think they make it very easy for you to spend money. If you're like a clinic or a larger practice, you have like a little bit more money to spend, I think it can be an effective way to acquire patients and acquire clients. I think the really important thing here is to think about paid advertising as experimentation. So, this month we're going to spend $500 on this advertising campaign. We're not just going to like spend $5,000. We're going to spend a set amount, and then we really need to like track our return on investment, right? So if we're, spending $500, we're not getting any clients, like, okay, we're going to like that. We tried it. It didn't work. We're going to try something else. I think what happens here is like people just like burn through money, or they're not really tracking it. So they don't know if it's effective. I would start with content marketing, word of mouth referrals first. And then the way I think about paid is like, okay, you've grown to a certain point. Now, like we need to invest a little bit more into some paid advertising. But I would, start with what's considered organic, or, like advertising marketing that you're not paying for. Any thoughts or questions here?
I guess for the paid advertising, I know, my old practice, we got to that size where we experimented a little with advertising. And even on Facebook, there was some weird rules around like medical advertising and any claims around depression. I mean, it was just sort of like, we treat depression, they'd like flag that. And then I know we have a lot of ketamine clinics who are getting flagged and shadow banned for even, for using the word ketamine. And it just, that seems a little scary to me. Do you have tips for folks in terms of just that medical advertising piece?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. It's probably similar to the cannabis industry, and I think so paid becomes difficult. And I like, my advice here is, if you do have a decent sized budget, to find someone who really like specializes in this area. So even within marketing, right? Like I have more of a focus and concentration in content marketing. And so this like paid marketing, it's something that I've managed, but it's not a specialization of mine. And so I would say like, if you want to experiment with this, you have a budget for it, I would like find someone who this is like what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I know there's also like rules around, like medical boards have rules around testimonials and all sorts of things. So I think a lot of the stuff that a traditional paid content marketer might suggest are like not ethical for our field.
Yeah. I mean, I always encourage folks, like, depending on your license type, to like consult with your code of ethics. And if there is ever like a question, or if you're not sure, like contact your board, because you don't want to get yourself in a situation, where you're putting your license at risk. Something I would say here too is like this last point around like directories. I think like I've heard from therapists being a good referral source. And so there too, like, just, I think having this attitude of like experimentation is something that can be really helpful, of like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work or not. And that's like often the case in marketing in general, is like, I don't know if it's going to work. Like, I don't know if like a tweet that I post or a newsletter I send is really going to resonate or not. Like, I have a hypothesis that it will, but I don't know until I put it out there. And so I think sometimes like it feels overwhelming, but just start and like try something. And if it works, great. Like if you sign up for a directory, you don't get any referrals. Okay, great. That didn't work. I don't see it necessarily as like wasted money or lost income. It's like you tried something, it didn't work. Great. So I mentioned my Twitter a few times. So, if you want to connect with me there, do so at your own risk. And then my newsletter is Therapy Marketer. It's therapymarketer.co is the website, or if you just put Therapy Marketer in to Google, you should be able to find it. It goes out every Tuesday. My promise is that every issue of that newsletter delivers value. So if you ever feel like it doesn't, please hold me accountable to that.
How long have you been doing that newsletter, by the way? It's been quite a while, yeah? Yeah.
So I started it in October of 2020. So it's been about 2 years. And like a learning for me in that kind of experiment of starting my own newsletter is just that it takes time. I think that any kind of marketing is about consistency and just like showing up. And there's no like quick wins. I think, people want to like open a practice and be full within a week. And the reality is that just like marketing takes time. And like, even for me, yes, the newsletter has, 2,000 therapists on it now, which is like really amazing. But for the first 6 months, it was like 50 people. And those were people that I knew. And so like by just showing up and, continuing to send it every week, like it's just grown a little bit over time. The way that I think about marketing, especially when it comes to content, is it's kind of like pushing a boulder up a hill. Like in the beginning, it's going to be really tough. It's going to feel like difficult, like you're not making any traction, but you get to like a certain point, and then there's like a tipping point, and then great, now the boulder starts rolling down the other side. You've built this great referral network. Your phone won't stop ringing, right? Like, so you just kind of got to get to that point. And then, at that point, it's like, great, do I want to expand my practice? That's kind of a different set of problems.
Right. Yeah, so my husband's a psychiatrist, and he has a Substack newsletter, and that again consists, he sort of had to make a pledge to himself to do at least once a week and really stick with it. But one of the things that I like about the Substack platform in particular is, well, there's a number of things, but the one I'm thinking of now is that you can like list on your website other newsletters to recommend, and then they can recommend you, and then you can track how much like you get from that, and it generates a lot, right? That sort of social proof that other people are reading this, and it feels kind of good also to drive, like if your friend's launching one, to get more traffic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's social proof, right? Like testimonials or reviews. That's a tough thing as a therapist, a mental health professional. You can't ask clients right, to like write you a review. So like, how do you kind of build that? There's ways, right? Like, if you're measuring like effectiveness in your practice, if you're able to kind of gather data there, that's like one way that you can potentially, on your website, talk about kind of the impact that you make. But yeah, I think that one in particular is tough.
Yeah, the testimonials. I see a lot of testimonials, and some of them I think are questionable for what the boards allow. So testimonials from other clinicians are helpful too.
I've seen therapists say like, I've helped more than like 1,000 clients, things like that. Those kinds of numbers that are more anonymized can be helpful. Question about the newsletter. Yeah. So Dr. Carlene mentioned Substack. So Substack is an email newsletter tool that allows you to like start a newsletter, and also like all of your newsletters are published on a website, which is really nice. And I believe it's free to sign up. But if you're just like, I kind of newsletter tool that I tend to recommend is MailChimp, just because it's pretty user friendly and it's also free.
Yeah, I think with Substack, I think it's free, although you can do some interesting like subscription paywalling. So you can make like most of your posts free, but then you can have like a subscription plan for like juicier content, right? So if you're offering like a course or something, you could kind of paywall that.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, it's very, very cool. So I think Medium is another, I guess that's more of a blog, but they're all just ways to kind of communicate with a larger audience.
Yeah. And when, we think about like content and publishing content, the way that I like to think about it is that you're just like putting your ideas and thoughts out into the world, and that's going to like attract like-minded people to you. I use this metaphor of a lighthouse, of like, you're just like putting your signal out, and like, that's going to attract people who are looking for, what you're saying, and it can start conversation. And so like, if you don't put your ideas out, like if you don't publish them, if you're not on social media, if you're not, writing articles, it's like, you don't have that opportunity.
I just want to jump in here really quick, because I know we've been answering a ton of questions, but if there are any, and we have a couple of queued up here, if there are any kind of questions in the remaining time that we have all together here, feel free to pop them in the chat if you haven't already, and we'll try and address as many as we can in this remaining time.
Yeah, we've got a lot of good questions that have come up, and we actually have just a couple here about websites, maybe kind of grouped together. One You mentioned, having a really client focus, speaking to that, what the client or patient is looking for. Do you have any examples of one in particular that might be good to look at? And then someone was wondering, I guess your website is like pretty simple. I think to like 300 words. Like, how do you kind of convince somebody that you're an expert with like such a simple website? Some people have much more elaborate and are like, I found, or like vaporware. Like, it's like, this company isn't real. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's definitely like a stylistic thing, right? Like I mentioned, Seth Godin being an inspiration for me, and his style as a marketer is like very concise. And that's a style that I try to emulate. And in my experience, I think that tends to resonate, right? Like, think about your own behavior as someone who looks at a website. Like, if you go to a website and there's just paragraphs of text, you're like probably not going to read it, especially if you're looking at it on your phone. And we know now, like, most people browse the internet on their phone. And so when you pull up a website and it's just a wall of text, like, it's people aren't going to read it, is the reality. And so, in my own marketing, I really try, and that like comes through in my website, in my newsletter. Like, you'll rarely see more than 2 or 3 lines per text without like a paragraph break. And that's intentional because people tend to like scan.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed, I'm just looking at your website now. And so I really like, again, getting to that social proof. It's a very simple website, but who we've helped. You've listed Therapy for Black Girls, Blueprint, Open Path Collective, Mental Health Match, right? These are all marquee, really, quite amazing brands. So it's like, I don't really need to know that much more if you've worked with those. And I think for therapists and clinicians, I've seen if they're in the media at all, if they do any kind of press, they'll put like, the icon for whatever press. And I feel like patients like that. Like, I know patients would say, oh, you were in Vogue or something like that. They like that. I don't know if you have thoughts on that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely going back to the fact that, as a clinician, it's like, it's difficult to solicit those reviews, and often you just can't do that, right? Like, and so I think having social proof in other ways, like, yes, being a contributor to the media, or, I think about like some therapist friends of mine who have like columns for Psychology Today, or, someone like Lori Gottlieb, for example, a friend of mine who like writes a column for The Atlantic, like something like that. Absolutely. Like, as a potential client, you see something like that, you're like, wow, like this person they probably know what they're talking about. And I think the other thing to remember is like, you don't have a lot of time when someone comes to your website. Like, within 4 or 5 seconds, they're going to make a decision whether they want to continue reading or move on. And so that's another kind of argument for like brevity, having like a really strong like statement, whether it's your headline or your slogan or whatever, like at the top of your website, that it's like really clear when someone comes to your website within like 4 or 5 seconds, like, okay, like I know what this person does. Because if not, like they're gonna leave,
lose interest. Yeah, no, thank you. And another question in the chat, I think is a really excellent one, which is, what about when people try to discuss protected health information via social media, talking about specific symptoms or medications? How do you recommend that? And that being sort of a fear. I know I have thought as a physician, sometimes I won't engage, or you'll say, I'm not able to provide medical advice on this platform. And then if I get weird DMs like looking for treatment, I just don't respond to them. I don't want to engage, because I think by engaging as a clinician, there is that risk of like establishing a clinical treatment relationship. So I try to stay clear of those. And similarly, if you start to become known on social media for mental health, you'll get the anti-psychiatry trolls to come out. You'll get some hateful comments, and I don't typically engage with those at all. I don't know, Michael, what your thoughts are on the Osmind one. I was like, oh, we've arrived.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, just kind of in my own experience, as my following on social media has grown, so has like the negative sentiment, which is unfortunate, but that's just sort of the way that the internet works. But when it comes to discussing clients right? Like we just don't do that. Like there's no identifiable information that should be published. And that's just like confidentiality. That's kind of like a no-brainer, right? Something that a lot of therapists do that, that I know, like they will have clients as part of the intake sign like a social media policy or agreement.
Mhm.
And that just, they agree to whatever they kind of the terms that they set, including like, I'm not going to engage with you on social media. We're not going to enter into like a dual relationship, right? Like we have a clinician client relationship. And so like that relationship exists in the office or, virtual office. And like, we don't engage outside of that. So I think it can become a gray area, right? If you're like messaging with your clients on Instagram, like I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Yeah. And the social media policy, I think Dr. Keely Coombs, I think is one of the folks who pioneered this. So I put in the chat an example. I know I have one for my practice. Maybe that's something I could share out with some of the Osmind practice community, because if it's kind of modified over the year as norms have changed and as
Right.
online professional identities have changed, what's acceptable. But I think it's a great idea to proactively discuss that with patients.
Yeah. And if people like, there's a question here about, if someone asks a question or sends you a DM. So, I've dealt with that in a few companies that I've worked with. So, right now I work with Herd. And so we'll get, folks asking us very specific like tax and accounting questions on social media. And we just tell them like, we can't offer financial advice. Like that's just a, boilerplate response. When I was working with the Gottman Institute, folks would message us asking like questions about their marriage. Like, what should I do? And so we just had a response that said, we're unable to offer, relationship advice via social media. If you're, interested in finding a therapist, here's a link. Right. And so if someone does reach out to you, you could respond to them and say like, hey, I'm unable to offer advice via social media. If you'd like to schedule a consultation with me, or here's how you book an appointment, you just like direct them to, that way. But yeah, you don't want to get into a situation where you're offering advice via social media. Something to keep in mind, and something that I've learned, is that anything that you post on the internet, anyone can screenshot, and like it, is permanent. So just something to think about, like as you're, responding to comments or putting stuff out there, it can like come back to bite you later. So just like be very intentional about that and like how you show up online. Because even if you delete something, someone maybe like, has record of it.
Yep. And there have been some blowback for clinicians due to some of that stuff. So
right. Yep.
All right.
I think we're almost at time. I know I don't know if we got to every single question, but we will make sure to send out an email with a link to Michael to kind of connect with Michael. And we just really appreciate everyone coming, and really appreciate you, Michael, joining today. And Carlene, of course, thank you so much for facilitating so many amazing resources. This is such a broad topic, and it's hard to cover everything in an hour. And I feel like we covered a lot, and, people brought amazing questions. I see amazing comments here in the chat. We do have another upcoming event in a couple weeks here. We'll make sure to send out the registration link in that email after this event, as well as, follow Osmind on social media. We will definitely be advertising it on there. And we also have a newsletter that you can sign up for, as well as Michael's newsletter at osmind.org. And we'll make sure to plug Michael's newsletter as well. But thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. Really, really appreciate it. So much knowledge and so much expertise. We really appreciate you taking the time to share.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Sounds like everyone's super excited in the chat.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My DMs are open on Twitter. So
awesome.
Great.
See you on Twitter.
Thanks all. All right.
Bye.
Bye.